Welcome back to The Change Physician. This is episode 157. Welcome back to The Change Physician. I am Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my wide-eyed co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And we are bringing to you our episode 157 that is going to talk about, actually the last episode was about, are we going for the home for the holidays or home for the holidays? And we reflected back on some nostalgic feelings of holidays and how we want the future of our holidays to look like. But I thought this quote that I came across would be perfect for following that episode and leading into some cool reels of our past year that you'll get to enjoy in future episodes following this one. But the quote that this episode is steered around is, "Only by not forgetting the past can we be the master of the future." There are plenty of other quotes that kind of sound reminiscent of that, but this one's by Ba Jin, who's a prolific Chinese writer. And I just wanted to bring up some of these things were, let's see, just to give you a little background on this person. He had a novel named Jia, which criticized traditional Chinese family system, and his work labeled him a counter-revolutionary during the country's cultural revolution in the 60s, and was ostracized from society. And in the early 2000s, he called for the creation of an official cultural revolution museum to document the impact of the era, believing this would prevent China from repeating past mistakes. Though a museum did open in 2005, it was covered up by the Chinese authorities less than a decade later. And with this quote, he points out that no experience exists in a vacuum. By reflecting on where we've been, we can chart the course ahead to steer us in a better direction. So I think for the Change Physician, this is like perfect for us learning from our past experience, maybe deciding on what we like, what we don't like on this limited time on Earth, how we can redirect our course and maybe have a more fulfilling life, whether it's in our career or personal life and whatnot. Any thoughts on that quote, just to start off, Kevin?
I think there's a ton. And this could really be multiple different episodes, because you can talk about it from just a historical basis, you can talk it from a personal basis, you can talk it from a familial basis. Since we just came off of the Home for the Holidays episode, it sort of well, I shouldn't say that. Coming off of this episode being at the end of 2021, what this makes me think of is this reflection that we tend to do around this time of year of the past that we have. And that reflection, whether it's a year, 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years, what you're really looking for, those patterns. And so I think kind of one of the root about this is if you don't see those patterns that occurred previously and appreciate those, what was involved with those patterns, then we're more likely to repeat them again, and oftentimes in a very detrimental way. So this kind of leads into that. Those who don't understand history, or those who don't learn from history, are damned to repeat it. And there's a lot. Humans basically function by patterns, and people will say, well, that never happened. Like one that gets a lot of discussion now is the rise of Nazism in Germany, right? And people say, well, you're making these comparisons. And if you think that the pattern is going to be exactly the same every time, you haven't learned anything. It's a pattern. It's not a picture. So being able to appreciate these moments in time, and then being able to see the patterns that were involved, will allow you to perceive the potential future pattern that may be taking place and potentially change it. And that goes for business, that goes for life, that goes for society, or whatever. I'm kind of shocked that the Chinese government covered up that museum. Ba Jin died in 2005, so the same year that the museum opened. But it seems sort of ignorant. Oh my God, I hope we don't, our podcast is small, so it's never happened. But like, oh my God, the Chinese government is going to go after us because they do some kooky stuff. But the Chinese government is, the people who are involved in that government are like PhDs. They are not like the ones we have here, where they're all a bunch of lawyers and goofballs. These are people who are learned people. And you would think that they would appreciate that, because you wouldn't want to repeat the Cultural Revolution where you just basically destroy your intellectual elite. Yeah. So for me personally, what this is all about is being able to appreciate patterns that have been established, so that you can recognize them when they're starting to form again. So then you have the potential to change them. Again, coming back to this idea of awareness and intention, so that you're aware enough to recognize them, so that you can intentionally change or intentionally choose not to change what it's going to ultimately end up as.
Yeah. So I just had to look up, see how long he lived. I was just curious.
99 years.
Yeah, it said age of 100, but 101 by Chinese reckoning. That just, I don't understand that. But apparently he had Parkinson's the last few years and he couldn't speak or walk in the last few years of his life. But talk about having a lot of years under your belt and recognizing patterns. Like it's not all of us are going to have that opportunity, but like you said, there's so many different layers of learning lessons for your own individual life, your own family. If, like we talked about in the last episode, creating traditions, your own family, or putting it in a direction that either prepares your children, if you have children, whatever it is that you're trying to create for the life that you have with those you love and care about. And then on a community level, on a national level, on a global scale. And obviously with this pandemic, it's, there are global issues that we're going to have to start seeing patterns and be more prepared to deal with things. And of course, we have a huge population that keeps growing. So maybe this is one way that natural selection or the world is finding ways to keep that from rising too fast. Who knows? But
yeah. So I mean, you can do from micro to macro to meta, like when we kind of pull it into the little level up to the meta, where we're looking at like society and change and like global patterns. But on the micro side, when you're looking at an individual, what I find this is really interesting is you can learn from these patterns from everything. The change position, we focus on awareness and attention. We also focus on different aspects such as wealth, growing wealth, your financial health, your physical health, and your relationship health. And each of those has a pattern. So let's look at where you are financially. Well, where you are financially is a result of behaviors that you've done over time. And if you are not where you want to be financially, or there's things that are unsuccessful, the thing that you need to be looking at is, well, what are those patterns that you are establishing? What is your spending pattern? What is your saving pattern? What is your investing pattern? And the only way that to really kind of appreciate those is to kind of look back and say, well, what have I done? And we've had episodes on this. Is like, well, where did you learn your basic financial knowledge or whatever? And being able to reflect on that, it reminds me of a couple of key conversations I had when I was 20. A couple of instances I had when I was growing up, and kind of going from there. And once you kind of see those patterns, then it provides that opportunity to break through. I was just talking to somebody earlier in one of my other favorite quotes, where it's like the only thing that's common between all your failed relationships is you.
Right. So
if you're someone who's struggling in the relationship front because you keep dating somebody who's perfect, and then they're not perfect, and then and you do this yo-yo thing, well, why is that pattern being established? What is involved? Where is your piece in that whole pattern? And then the healthful aspect is the same thing. Is if you are not where you want to be in your health right now, maybe if you need to lose some weight, or you're not strong enough, or you're not doing those activities, well, what are the patterns that establish that? And then how do you become aware of those patterns? So, because if you continue to do that pattern, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be the same place next year or the year after. It always makes me laugh on the financial side, right? Because you look at, like, you're reading like a fund prospectus or whatever, and the warning is always past. What is it? Past. God, what is that word I'm looking for? Past performance is no indicator for future performance. And I totally appreciate that. But the same token, one of the best indicators of what something in the future is going to be is what is done in the past. So, and I'm not, for the fun thing, if someone has 1 year of data, that's not data. But if you have 20 years of data, that's a lot of data, and I would appreciate that much more. So, anyway, I think it's the past is something that I think not a lot of us really appreciate as much as we should, in order to understand what the future could or may not be.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, you kept saying this one word called aware. You have to have awareness of those habits, but it's like the hardest thing to change is these habitual patterns that we've been running over and over and over. The neural patterns are just kind of ingrained without even, it doesn't take much energy a lot of times to just keep doing the same thing. but you have to have that awareness, and then you have to figure out how can you interrupt that pattern. How can you create a new one, maybe aligned with something you're already doing? I mean, there's a lot of tricks to it, but that's you can't be in denial if you
that's if you're flailing around going, why me all the time?
Yeah.
Well, that's the question to answer is, well, let's look, like, what are these patterns here? And it's not victim blaming. At least I don't see it as victim blaming. What it is just become aware of your individual contribution to this whole thing.
Right. And it's serving you in some capacity, whether, if it's not a helpful habit, it's probably serving something for you that maybe you need to find something else that serves that need. That's a better choice. I give an example. I don't know. People just, I don't know, they could love picking on other people all the time to make themselves feel better. And maybe having a hard time with relationships, just interpersonal relationships, and they don't realize how they're impacting or affecting other people. But there's something about your lack of security with yourself, and you have to make other people feel, I'm not a psychologist, but there's definitely some psychology going on there. I'm sure that you could point out that this is not benefiting you if you want to have a more successful interpersonal life, if you're always making people feel like crap. So,
and then you go, well, why is that pattern established? Like, what's the commonality to bullies that they have? What is the sense of self-esteem that's involved with this stuff? But it reflects back. It just reflects back again to the mission of what we're talking about with the change physician is being aware so that you can intentionally change. And the only way, I think, in many ways, that you can ultimately be aware of certain things is to look back at the history. What are the patterns that are already there? Because you don't know what tomorrow is, and you can't really predict that very well. In fact, that actually, now that I said that, it goes back to how your brain actually operates, right? So our brains, these predictive processing machines that we have, where they're kind of simulating this future, either immediate or far off. Which one was it? This book I've talked about before, which really was talking about the difference in human brains. What makes a human brain different than every other brain on the planet is our ability to think and imagine a distant future. And so it does that by taking information from your past experiences, taking current sensory information to compare it to those past experiences that provide meaning, so that can predict in the immediate term. It predicts, like, well, is that ball going to hit me in the face? It's flying through the air. But what the human allows us to do is we can generate all that stuff to see what's going to happen, not 1 minute or 10 milliseconds away, but actually 2 months, 2 years, 20 years in the future. Probably won't end up the way we exactly think, but that ability to predict or anticipate a distant future makes us unique. And the only way to really harness that in a way that is truly constructive is to be able to see those patterns that have been established in the past. Because you may have negative predictions, may have positive predictions, but if you're not aware of what, the difference between the two and why they're actually there and how you can tweak them a little bit, more likely to repeat those patterns. So 20 years from now, you're exactly where you were today.
Right. And I also think about this other level of, like, in a relationship, when you're remembering the past, if you're paying attention or reflecting back, you realize, I don't like this quality, or I don't like this or that in a person. It's not healthy. You can be more selective in your future choices. Do more due diligence based on what you've learned.
We should get a relationship expert on here, because I think that's like, it's sort of like, what do you call it when you, there's a military term for it, a debriefing, right? So everybody should have a relationship debriefing. Like, if you're in dating and things, you almost need somebody who can debrief when it's over, so that you can learn the positive, the negatives, and what to do next.
What you can live with, what brings you more joy, so you don't get caught up in that. Although, the whole issues of, the cerebral part and the love part, or the passion, all those different things can, muddy the waters a little bit.
Well, unless you go back and understand why. Right.
Yeah, it's so complicated, isn't it?
It is. I don't think it necessarily, but but we can start condensing that down. I think that's kind of the, well, I guess it's hard to believe for folks that I'm very introspective and I do a lot of thinking about this stuff. And very early on, and I kind of wonder about, when just talking about like patterns and relationships. Well, my parents got divorced. I was in middle school. I can't remember, 8th grade, 7th grade, somewhere around there. And so I remember at that time, there wasn't a lot of divorced people, weirdly enough. Mm-hmm. So most of my friends were married. So my pattern was, well, if my parents, and I'm actually very happy they got divorced, by the way, but if they, I didn't want to perpetuate that. So I remember very conscientiously looking at my friends whose parents were married and being aware of the patterns I saw there, like mm-hmm. what were involved in those relations, particularly the ones that I thought were very positive. Mm-hmm. So, but all that stops, it was all pattern awareness, right? Pattern awareness. And then when I wasn't a big dater, but those who I did date, apparently, I think I almost did like a debriefing when I was done, and kind of like, why did this happen? Where was my responsibility? What was their responsibility? Da, 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 da. So I don't know where I was going with that, other than I guess that's just what I do. I look for patterns. I'm always seeking patterns.
Too bad you weren't around, my previous marriage be my debriefer.
Well, that's the sad thing is oftentimes you end up needing to debrief because few people are aware enough to actually, whatever the opposite of debrief was, prepare. I guess that would be it, right? To one of the kind of the downfalls of the human experience is a lot of times we have to have the experience before we're willing to change, Mm-hmm. Because I have you ever wondered that? What, if someone said something to you before a negative experience, would you actually change your behavior?
No, because I didn't have the awareness that I was serving some other need, but yet the outcome was not in my best interest. It's so weird.
Well, it is weird. And if you ever tried to counsel somebody, your friend, most of the time, that's why even the TV shows are like, oh, don't say anything. Don't say anything. Because usually it ends up poorly for
they're not ready. Their beliefs are set, and it doesn't matter until something shakes their world and they're willing to shake maybe the belief. It's different. The reality is different than what they believed.
Yeah.
The
patterns,
dilemma,
man. All patterns.
Yeah. The past, usually reminds you of the things that are mistakes. I mean, that's where we learn our lessons. I don't know. Unfortunately, a lot of us, I would say for myself, some of the hardest lessons are the biggest lessons, I should say, are things that I made mistakes myself. They really stick with you.
And that's important.
Yes.
Right? You can provide very strong learning opportunities with
a little self-compassion. Don't totally beat yourself up. You got to move forward.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts before you?
Well, other than I appreciate Bajin. Thank you for your quote. Only by not forgetting the past can we be the master of the future. It is a perfect quote on so many different ways, because what I like about good quotes, just to kind of drag this out just a little bit further, is a good quote has this condensed wisdom, mm-hmm. but then that wisdom can be applied in multiple levels and multiple ways. So like we said, health, wealth, personal relationships. Then we have the micro, the meta, and the macro level where you can hone it in, you can move it out, and it's easily applied to all of those. So it's super cool. And I hope everybody out there thinks a little bit more about those patterns in the past, whatever the patterns that you're looking for, so you can pull that information, because that's the best way that you're going to be able to at least predict or anticipate a future that may or may not want.
Exactly. Well, I'll let you take us out.
All right. So thank you all for joining us on The Changed Physician for another somewhat introspective journey into the quote from Bajin. You can always join us at thechangedphysician.com, whether you're a physician or a physician ally. And until next week, stay well.
Take care.